Ashleigh Tobin, you are very welcome to the Road Back Home podcast. How are you today?
I am very good indeed. It's always lovely when there's some blue in the sky, and we've been lucky at the moment with that. So yeah, in a lovely place here in Wicklow.
Oh, you're in Wicklow. Yeah, I'm in East Clare. Well, actually, I'm really in Tipperary. I have to get used to saying that. I've always said when people ask me where I am, I always say Killaloo because the town I live in Tipperary is Ballina, which
Right.
we automatically think Mayo, of course. So yeah, but yeah, the sun is splitting the sky, as they say, and we're all melting.
Yes.
Ashleigh, let me just tell the listener how I'm going to tell the listener how I came across your. Well, first of all, Jean, who was our guest most recently, Jean Evans, the networking architect, said to me, "You need to check out this lady, Ashleigh Tobin. You need to know Ashleigh." And I said, "Oh, sure. Why wouldn't I?" And I went and done my due diligence and research, and I came across your TED Talk.
hmm
And your TED Talk is about menopause. Forgive me now for not remembering the title of your TED Talk.
So very simply, how menopause will change your life.
Yes, yes. And I was blown away. And I immediately connected with you on LinkedIn. I was like, we need to talk, all of that. First of all, let me say that, content wise, of course, but your storytelling, Ashleigh, I was just like, does this lady write books? I just got such Maeve Binchy vibes from how you told that story. Tell us about you. And this is going to be like 1,000 questions at once. Tell us about you or your TED Talk or your work, your background, but also how did you end up being like giving me the Maeve Binchy vibes? Where does that come from?
So from when I was a very small child, I loved to notice things, especially about human behavior. I was a very quiet child, and I just notice things. I love noticing things. That's the best description for it. And I'm curious about why humans do what we do. Even if we say we're doing different things, how we then go and do something the complete opposite to that. And of course, I was born in 65, so Ireland in the 70s wasn't a place for asking curious questions about uh, why the church said X and did Y, or why women weren't allowed to do A, B, and C when men were. So I stayed quiet, but I gathered a lot of information and stories and questions in my head. And I suppose my own work has been always just really understanding that life is short and we need to tell a story to ourselves that we can live into in the best possible way. Um, Fast forward many, many years and lots of different trainings because I'm very curious and eager to find out about why humans do what we do a lot of the time. And I joined Toastmasters again about 9 years ago. Not because I wanted to be a better public speaker. I was a decent enough public speaker, but because I wanted to hone the skill of storytelling. And I've realized that although I was always told as a child I wasn't particularly creative or artistic, I now realize that actually words are my colors. And the spoken voice is my paintbrush as such. I just love telling what I call stories, ordinary stories about why humans do what they do. And sometimes, even if it's contradictory to what it is they want in life. So I suppose, one way of describing the storytelling aspect of my work. And let's face it, we usually know what we're supposed to do, whether it's to get fit or to lose weight or to be strong. We know we know what to do. We know we need to lift a weight or walk longer or eat less rubbish, or we know that. But actually, when we can begin to believe a story that that's possible for us, that who we are in the world, um, includes looking after ourselves very, very well, now it becomes part of who we are and part of who we're becoming. And so for me, that's the magic of story. When I can believe a better story for myself, yeah, everything is possible. So that's why I love storytelling and include it so much in my work with men and women to help each of us, myself included, live a life that makes our hearts sing, because none of us are getting out of here alive, and we might as well have a lovely time while we're here.
Yes. Oh, I really want to speak to that. This, so you've always been interested in story, like the question of why people do things, like what's the story behind you doing that, which is exactly what I asked you. Like, what's the story behind you, standing on that stage and delivering your message in the way you did? Um, and your your why is that you're a storyteller, and your why even like behind that is that like stories are important and stories matter and stories are powerful, and the story we tell about ourselves are fundamental and pivot. Like it's so, in my work, let's say it's it's an identity shift, let's say, that I'm facilitating, and also in myself, right? It's more than behavioral change. It is an entire identity shift. And, the way I've started to describe it is, from like I was a former escape artist to a creative wayfinder. I kind of am using the same amount of intelligence and creativity, only I'm not using it to escape my life anymore or just escape discomfort. I'm using it to find a way through, you know? So, but the underlying story, I have to believe, I have to let go of, and we all do have to let go of our understanding and believing ourselves to be escape artists, because escape artists don't, find a way through. They run, they don't do
Absolutely.
conflict. We don't do conflict. We don't do, like, I don't do negative feedback or blah, 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 blah. Something that I've said as well, Ashleigh, that, so I work a recovery program, and, it's all about willingness. And there's a lovely prayer that we say, and it is, it's the step aside prayer. The set aside prayer. Help me set aside everything I think I know about me, my recovery, this program, this room, this podcast, blah, 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 whatever it is. Like, help me set aside everything I think I know so that I may have a new experience. And as somebody who used to be, my identity was party animal, it was rebel. I was an absolute rebel, smoking, drinking, all the things. I remember distinctly times in my life where I would have sat in my hangovers, or I remember one specific thing. I had been for a beautiful forest walk, and I was sitting on the stoop of my lovely cottage when I got back. I was living in the forest at the time, and it's actually the place where I got sober. But before I did get sober, I was sitting on the stoop and I was smoking, and I was just feeling so disheartened because I was like, I'll never not be able to do this. I'll never not be able to finish a walk without, or a meal or anything. I'll never not be able to just smoke or, going out. I would white knuckle. I'd be like, I'm not going to drink tonight. And then I'd end up drinking and the usual mayhem would ensue. And I'd be like, I'll never be able to. Anyway, what I have discovered is that I was wrong. I was so convinced that I was this person who would always smoke and always drink and never be able to give them up. So one of the mantras I have now, Ashleigh, is like, if I'm struggling with something and I think I'm never going to get this, I remind myself, you've been wrong before. What if you're wrong? You know? And now I kind of say to myself, like, I can't wait to be wrong about more things.
Well, here's the thing. When I share story, very often I'll share a personal story about
Yeah.
perhaps what I call sometimes the loneliness inside the confines of our own skull. Um, Often the story we believe to be true about ourselves was never ours. It was either a coping mechanism or it was a story that was given to us when we were younger. And because we were young when we took it on, it feels as though it's true and real. And hope is an incredible thing. So just even, I suppose, I'm hopeful that when I share what those struggles were like, perhaps like I did in the TEDx talk about postnatal depression, functioning beautifully in the world and nobody understanding the torment that was going on, the miscarriages, the infertility, these pieces, I share them mostly in the hope that a listener, somebody watching the TEDx, could go, oh, actually, there's someone who has been there as such
Yeah.
and now has a different story, now is finding their voice, now is claiming their place in the world. Because, we're all connected. Humans can do incredible things for other humans, but only when we feel connected to them. And so I'm hoping that the vulnerability that I sometimes share in a story helps me to connect with somebody else who, because here's the thing, when we're struggling with something, whether it's with an addiction, whether it's with loneliness, whether it's with sadness and grief, what can often get layered in there is silence and shame, which brings isolation. And then it makes it hard to connect. So I hope that my stories can, I suppose, touch that place of vulnerability. And then I throw a good old dose of humor and laughter and lightness in. Because sure, we're daft really as humans, aren't we?
Yes. Oh God, if you didn't laugh, you'd cry, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ashley, I'm mesmerized here talking to you. I'm falling in love talking to you. Like your voice is so beautiful and your way is so beautiful, but I feel like um, we're on a subject that is massively important and is not the one that I thought we were going to be on. Um, it's not surprising because, like I said to you, the content, when I watched your talk, of course I was resonating with the content, but it was you and it was the story that was really, drawing me in. And I can tell you that your hope is well founded. Like you are having that impact. And I just marked 8 years sober from alcohol, right? This person, there are people in my former life who would probably balk and be like, what? Not a drop? You? And it's funny that's like, I kind of don't, there have been times where I go, is this really, like, really, Amanda? Like, is this our life, or but at the same time, it's not that big of a shock. It was for a long time. The cigarettes also were a big shock for me. I was like, God, I can't believe I did that. But anyway, that aside, marking the reason, like I got sober 8 years ago because somebody told their story, somebody I could relate to, somebody who, because I'd heard lots of stories of people, making changes in their lives. But I never really I never really heard a story that sounded like mine. I never really heard somebody whose, let's just say, interests, like I'll be very specific and say I had never heard a creative tell the story of getting sober. It always seemed to fall into, I got sober and suddenly became a marathon runner. Whereas this was, I got sober and suddenly became an artist. I was like, now that I can see, that I can hold space for. Like, I know there's an artist in me, but now I was already an artist at that stage, but I was like, oh wow, this is a portal for my artist to have a second life, like to have more space, have more room. Like there wasn't a runner in me just dying to get out. There wasn't a vegan in me dying to get out. But there was an artist in me who was hampered by my hangovers. And there was more. There was a teacher in me. There was a speaker in me. There was a person who had something to say in me, who was suffocating under the weight of these addictions.
For me, for those who want to go and take a look at the TEDx talk, my purpose, I suppose, was to give voice to women who've been gaslit over the years, perhaps by the medical profession, but also by their peers who just didn't understand how challenging things were. But it was also more than that. It was to tell the story of those 4 stages of womanhood. Menopause is sort of very on trend at the moment. And although it has formed part of my work for the last 20 years about hormonal health and menopause, there's a place now where a lot of the narrative is about, making sure that we can stay young and not go into this decline that happens at menopause. And I suppose I wanted to give voice to the story of the 4 stages of womanhood. And for me, that's so important because it's not a story that's told very often. And, historically, when I was a child, I'd heard those 3 stages of womanhood: maiden, mother, crone. But even back then, I did remember thinking, well, what if you weren't a mother? Well, where did you fit in that? And it was many years later that I came across the 4 stages of womanhood. And it's maiden, creative, enchantress, sage. And when I did a little bit of research about that enchantress, also known as warrior woman stage, it literally coincides with our 40s and our 50s, that time of life that is often considered over the hill or the beginning of the end. But actually, there are huge resources inside us waiting to emerge at that time of life. It is a natural time that we step back and go, okay, heading into the second half, how am I going to be? Who am I going to be remembered as in this second half? And, we've usually by midlife picked up some incredible skills that don't need to be thrown away. But actually, we've also forgotten some of the skills that we also had innately. And whether that's to be more self-compassionate or to become a poet or a speaker or an artist or a marathon runner, that we can, I call it, create roles that rock our world, not wreck our head for the second half of life. And it's no wonder that so many women in their 40s and 50s wonder, is this it? Actually, I'm not sure. There's nothing wrong when we're doing that. It's the call of what I call the enchantress or the warrior woman going, you're about to start the second half. How do you want to be? Yeah, it's time for you. That's a good thing.
God, this is so fascinating. The gaslighting. I've definitely, in my 40s, I had, I kind of don't want to get into that because I'll come back around to that because I do have some stories, that encompass pregnancy loss, PMDD that I knew I had, but was gaslit up to the hill over it, and everything else. But this maiden, creative, enchantress, sage, around the time that I made the decision to stop drinking, I was sitting on the sofa. It's so funny that I have these very vivid memories of points in time that were, me checking in and being like, I'll never, or what if, they're in this house I lived in for 3 years. It all happened here. All, the pregnancies, the pregnancy loss, everything. I was in a forest. I was living in a forest. It was like my dream space. And so much happened. And I did go there. It was like a chrysalis.
Mhm.
I knew that I couldn't, it's not that I couldn't have gotten sober, but I wonder, could I have gotten sober had I stayed where I was known as a drinker? I moved up into this parish and nobody knew me. It was a clean slate and I got to be whoever I wanted to be, In recovery, sometimes we say, oh, that's a geographic cure. It's as in like you think that, oh, I'll move up here and things will be different. Things weren't different, but things did fall, I did surrender some obscuring behaviors, let's say. But anyway, as I was sitting there with the alcohol, because I was at this crossroads, Ashleigh, and it was like I had had the 2 pregnancy losses, and I was being confronted with my coping. My coping was not great. I also was being confronted with the fact that I had an unaddressed eating disorder, and I had that I was in complete denial about, and I had a body shame. Like I had body dysmorphia and I had a like phobic. I was phobic in terms of, my body changing. Um, and all of that was kind of resting. And I had allowed, quote unquote, allowed myself to get pregnant, as in like I came off birth control and I was too scared to deliberately like to go and do it. But I was like, well, let me just come up and see if it happens. And if it happens. So I was like throwing it out into the universe and seeing what would come back. And then, like I said, all of the coping was challenged when it didn't go smoothly, right? And I made a decision in that time because the doctors were kind of saying, well, if you really do want to get pregnant, you're going to have to, be a bit more, um, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? Like conscious about it or something, or you're going to have to be a bit more something or invested or committed. Committed is the word, like a bit more committed. And of course, I was still smoking and drinking at this stage. So I wasn't committed. I was scared. And also the truth was I didn't want it, but I thought I should, Ashleigh. And maybe that's the maiden mother crone. I thought I should. I was supposed to be a mother. And I had this terrible sentence rattling around in my brain that said, you're not a real woman until you have children, or unless you have children. You're not a real mother, or you're not a real woman unless you're a mother, right? And then I had lots of accusations and say, well, if you don't have children, it's going to prove to the world that you couldn't cope. It's going to prove that you're just too weak to be a mother. I had all of these horrible accusations, but I was sitting on the sofa in this one crossroads and I was thinking to myself, okay, let me write down. Journaling has always been my thing. I got my journal out and I was like, let me journal about this. What is it I think? Because I'm on the fence. I don't want it, but I also don't not want it. There's something about it that I feel I would be missing out on if I pass it up. What is that thing? And when I got past all the social bullshit, I actually did. There was a part of me that really does enjoy having an intimate seat in the journey, life journey of another human being. Being somebody who is some kind of a companion to another human being, a witness to the human experience. Somebody who, is quite mothering in terms of like, that you can like nurture. I like to nurture, guide, shape, celebrate all these things. I really like that connection, that really emotionally and spiritually intimate connection that I imagine would come from motherhood. And I thought to myself, gosh, I could actually have that. I could just have that through my work. Like, this is the work I'm called to do in the world. I don't have to produce new humans, you know? And I realized I had a bolt of clarity in that moment. I was like, if I produce this through my work, it feels much more aligned because all of the things I didn't want were like if through my work, like I'm not going to have to be anybody's mammy. I'm not going to have to, grow a human inside me and deal with the trauma of that, because that would be traumatic for me. I'm not going to have to, like, it would have been very traumatic for me to have my own children. And and it would have been obviously by extension traumatic for them. Um, and then there were, like the the part that isn't romantic, like the late nights, the loss of sleep, all of these things that would have challenged my coping even more. There was work to do. I knew I had too much work, healing work to do within myself, and it made it very clear. And in that moment, I realized if I honor those needs in me, if I honor that desire in me, but channel it in a different way, suddenly alcohol became irrelevant in my life. That identity just dissolved because I didn't have space for it anymore. It literally, I felt like that whole time, my party animal self was a holding pattern. Was just like, well, we might as well drink because what else are you doing with your life anyway? So something really crystallized in that um, exercise that I did when I figured out what did I want to experience that I thought only motherhood could give me. And I realized that that was not how it had to happen. I could be I could create my own experience by honoring what I know that I want to experience and have it this way. The alcohol just dissolved. And then I made a bunch of art around letting go of the, the traditional mother, I went back on contraception. I did all the, like, I made a clear decision. That was it. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to do this instead. And that's when this part of me, maybe it's the creative, the enchant. I feel like that was my creative part. That
Yeah.
era was born, and that's 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we realize, I suppose, or come to those, light bulb moments at different stages in our lives. Um, and and when we do, we begin then to have an awareness that we are with ourselves on this journey. That the me inside has been the same me all the way through my life till now, and I'll be 60 in a week or two. And that we might as well have our own back and believe this better story for ourselves and be there with us as we live the life that we've been blessed to have been given. So it's lovely. It sounds as though, yeah, definitely. And that's why I loved that word creative, because the creative can be, about a career piece. It can be about art. It can be about music. It can be about anything, really. It's about
Mm.
finding something that we can put our heart and soul into and bring to bear to the world, whatever that is.
Yeah, like, and even like creating a new story for myself.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, I have I had a conversation with a client there recently, and she's kind of like in that place of, you know, we get very it's continuity, right? That idea back in the days on television, we used to have continuity announcers, and a continuity announcer is to ensure that there's a smooth transition between programs, and it was I miss having a continuity announcer, where the voice, this disembodied voice, and sometimes it became embodied, would come on in between programs and kind of like tend. There was a real tending to the audience and saying, I hope you enjoyed that program. And now, and a little bit of banter, and here's the next program. But anyway, the whole idea of continuity is that I must be, there must not be too much of a break from tradition as such. And so those of us who have been very embedded or enmeshed maybe in our stories of who we used to be, it doesn't make sense to some part of us to then start acting out of character. So my client is in that space at the moment where it's like, well, I've always been this kind of person, and And I'll give you another example, actually. One of my best friends, in fact, she's probably my best friend. She, for years, has been saying to me, what's with this journaling business? You know, like, not even that she was saying it to me for years, but I knew she didn't get it. Knew she didn't get my line of work, and she didn't pretend to get it either, by the way. Um, but recently, she's taken to it. Recently, she's kind of taken to the whole, what am I doing here? What am I, looking inside, So she's arrived at a point now where she's becoming reflective. She's been very busy. She's built an incredible business. And so that's where all her energy was going. That was her creative phase. So now she's in this new phase. It's like, well, what's next? Who am I now? And now she said to me not too long ago, she was like, oh, I get it now. Like, I thought you were just navel gazing. I didn't realize you were actually doing anything, but I get it now. Now it makes sense. So, and then my client at the moment is also in this space of like, well, I'm just, I've always just been a worker, like just head down, get on, do your thing. And the struggle with the continuity of suddenly becoming a reflective person who thinks about things, who journals, who tells the truth instead of just going along to get along. What would you say to that in terms of like that shift? How do we help our clients hold space for that break in continuity?
Sometimes the universe takes over and it will be, a divorce, a life-threatening illness, some dramatic change of, you've been made redundant or something like that. Sometimes there is no continuity and we don't get to decide. Actually, the universe puts something in our way and everything shifts. And in some ways, we have no option but to at least consider something different. And so I'm sure like yourself, many of my clients sometimes will come to me with those sort of, crossroad moments where something big has happened. And so for some people it's about that. That will be the starting point. For others, there's what I call, they can't ignore that restless longing inside that there must be something more. There must be something. It can't just be like this. In the TEDx that I mentioned, that whisper inside your head that says, is this it? Is this what life is about for you? I mean, for me, they're invitations not necessarily to change everything all at once. Some of us are big all or nothing sort of people. But actually, to even consider beginning to do something different. As humans, I like metaphor. I think of it that often that we have a dial, we go, the dial is 0 to 10. And if we're always that note, then, well, if I've always been a worker, sure, I can't just be a dialing to number 10, just having a great time doing whatever the hell I feel like. That'd be daft. You go,
yes.
Wait, there are numbers in between. So often it is about beginning with the tiniest little thing. I'm having spent many years doing the 0 to 10 sort of all or nothing and realizing that before long it's not that sustainable for us or isn't a fit with our ecology. We may still have things that we need to do in our current ecology that means it just isn't sustainable to change completely.
Mm-hmm.
However, to begin to change some of the things we're doing, to interrupt our own mean internal critic when it's given us a hard time and go, actually, you know what? Just today, dial it down a bit because I'm going to try a little bit of self-compassion. Sometimes this work, as you know, is happening on the inside long before it's happening on the outside. And we can set ourselves up for a bit of a tough time if we try and, right, that's it now, I'll be 60 now and I'm going to change my life and change everything in it. There are some personalities who can do that. But for the vast majority of us, our story of who we're becoming continues until the moment we draw our last breath. This isn't something we're going to do and then it's done. I consider that until whenever that day is that I draw my last breath, my story is continually being updated. How am I being in the world? Who am I being in the world? Is this way of being in the world okay? And so there, it's not so much about getting there or changing ourselves it's I'm going to say endless becoming. And I tweak
Mm.
it and adjust it. And some days I'm great at it and some days I'm woeful. And yeah.
Mm.
And such is life. The end. Let's just be as lovely to ourselves, and which of course means we love everyone else more. And yeah, certainly for me and the clients that I work with and the clients that tend to be attracted to me, that system seems to work a little bit better than the
Yeah.
0 to 10 dial.
Oh, I love that. My version of that, Ashley, would be, obviously there is the, let's work on the willingness first of all to be wrong, because you're telling the story that, well, I'm this person, I can't be this person, and say, well, let's first of all, let's just put on the table that you can't know everything, that you don't know. And so let's get certainty out of the picture here, because certainty feels good. The mind wants certainty. And so, and then that's the second thing. Well, let's get out of your mind for a start, because the mind is looking for the discrepancies here and is really freaked out by them. So get out of that driver's seat as such and let's stop analyzing it and looking at it with the eyes of the mind. And because that contrast is too jarring, of course. Like anybody who has done winter swimming, so the way that this whole like sauna and swim thing now is huge. Um, it takes a lot of mental energy to get into the water when it is extremes, like to go from hot, hot to cold, cold. But when it's more, like this time of year, it's just such a more easy transition. Okay, so the contrast is real. There's nothing wrong with you for struggling with that big of a leap. That's normal. Your brain needs time to process that. That's why we kind of like take our attention off that and then start noticing the tiny incremental what would we say? The tiny incremental nudges that are every day. So during the pandemic, me, like everybody else, actually, turned my bedroom into a jungle. I bought all the plants, you know? And there was one plant I bought that is called a prayer plant. Do you know the plant? And
No,
the whole thing about the prayer plant, for all the world, it's like not a fern, but almost like a palm. So it has those kind of, like long, this long stem type of a leaf. And what it does is it changes direction. So when the daylight comes, it goes from this kind of like erect position and it leans outwards. It relaxes. And then with when the daylight is, so during the course of the day, in other words, it's a moving plant. And that plant will move from, let's say, 1 on the dial to 10 on the dial. It's a very distinct movement. But so I sat by that plant and I tried to catch the movement. And I couldn't. You can't see it. But it's happening. And I found that the weirdest thing. So, you know, that's the other thing. The brain is looking for the movement as if, like, I would definitely notice if I left the room in the morning and the plant was in one position and I came back in the evening and it was in another position, then I can see it. And my brain is like, how did it do that? But I guess my point was that I used that point then as that plant as a teaching device during the pandemic to say, it's never not happening. It's only obvious when there's a big shift. So let's try and train you to notice how this is this shift is actually not all that jarring because it's never not happening. There are tiny, tiny, tiny things all day calling to you. Like, why are you walking? Again, this is an example from one of my real clients. There's a lovely walk around here that a lot of people go on. And you can either walk around the track that is man-made and built, but there's a tiny little, you can add this natural space to it if you want to. And you feel that in your body when you're approaching that fork in the road. The part of your brain that's all like, okay, we'll get our steps in because we know, we'll walk this way because we know, how to measure this and we know how many steps we walked and we'll feel like we did the walk because we're blah, blah, blah. But then there's that other nudge, your soul who goes, let's walk down here where the wildflowers are. That is much more of a relaxed walk. And those nudges are happening all day, every day, where you're being drawn towards maybe reading a book instead of watching Netflix. And that's where, if you just pay attention to those tiny little incremental things, they are the shifts that are paving the way for this bigger change. And if we just pay attention to those, I think personally, it has helped me not be so freaked out by the gap.
Hmm. One of the phrases I use, you used the word certainty, and another one is criticism or being critical. Our brain likes both of those things. It wants to know things are a particular way, and it can be quite critical if they're not. And the thing is, both of those find it hard to coexist with curiosity. So when we bring curiosity to our everyday, to what we're doing, to how we might load the dishwasher, speak with a friend on the phone, go on the walk, when we bring curiosity, it's very difficult for certainty or criticism to coexist with it. So for me, curiosity is it's an absolute daily tool that I use, purely because it makes me smile and allows me to remember, I suppose, to your point, that we don't know.
Yeah.
Not only do we not know everything, we don't even know what we don't know yet. So therefore, being curious opens us up to learn things.
This brings us right back to the very beginning. Like, that's your thing. It's like that's what you are saying, who you've always been. You've always been curious, And those of us who, like I've also I've also always been curious. Now, in saying that, sometimes my curiosity will have taken the back seat to the certainty, because the mind's job is to keep us safe. And as we say, as we both know, I'm 75, you're 65. The Ireland that we grew up in wasn't, it wasn't necessarily a safe place for small kids, and I don't even mean that physically. I mean that like in terms of shame.
Mm.
All you had to do was like step out of line in any way. In any way. Like, but the way I stepped out of line is that I had a fat body. And that was stepping out of line. I had a body that did not conform to the ways, and hence shame was very much my experience of being in my body. Or somebody who might have had, more energy than allowed them to sit still. And shame would have been their experience of being who they are. And when that is your experience, that's of course when fear kicks in. And that's when the mind kicks in to try and protect you from that shame or whatever. And you end up controlling your way through life. And when you control your way through life as such, you're not really being your true self. And in my case, that's absolutely part of the release valve, because it's very stressful to live like that. It's like holding your breath all the time. or holding the beach ball underwater, and of course it's going to come up, and explode, you know.
Mm.
Um, yeah, curiosity. I love that. Um, so how do we, for our listeners, how do we encourage more curiosity? Let's think about like a day and a day in the life of a curious person.
I talk to myself a lot. I have a very strong internal dialogue. These days, mostly I'm saying lovely things to myself.
Yeah.
And I'm saying lots of curious things to myself. Wasn't always the case.
Mm.
Um, but what I would say is start with the simplest things from the moment, whether it's the alarm goes off and your feet hit the floor. Just notice, and I'm saying just notice, but actually watch, feel the experience of going to the bathroom to brush your teeth. Are you saying the same things you've always said? What if you were to bring some playfulness to it? When do your commute to work, is there a way that you can do it somewhat differently? And by that, I mean, whether it's roll down the window of the car and notice the heat on your arm, or I live in the countryside, so I hear a lot of the bird song. Notice that. We get stuck in confines of our skull a lot,
Mm.
and that keeps us doing the same thing over again. So the first piece is always just to begin to notice how we're doing us in the world. I remember many, many years ago getting out of the car, and I had some letters to post, and I hopped out of the car and I was half running over to the post box. And then I don't know why, just that day, I suddenly went, why am I rushing? I'm not even in a hurry. Why am I rushing? But sure, I'd spent the previous 30 years rushing. And
Yeah.
and it didn't mean that I stopped rushing forever. But actually, one of the things I talk about often is that, the energy we move in. So is the pace that your story has said, I'm a hard worker, I get things done, I make sure it happens. I always move fast. Actually, that there are other paces. And so I
Mm.
remember, I'm sure I must have looked odd. I remember stopping with the two letters in my hand thinking, what if I just walked more slowly over to the post box? Now, some people will think, that's a bit daft. What was she doing that for? But what I was doing was trying to remind myself that just because I've always rushed, just because I've always been, you know, predictable, blah, 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 able to get everything done, I can get 1,000 things done before my breakfast, blah, blah, doesn't mean I need to always be that.
Mm-hmm.
And when we become aware first, that's where it starts. For me, that's the first step. That's what I call my starting position, needs to be that I realize I'm in here and I can notice what this body I have is doing. Sometimes it's doing great stuff and sometimes it's just running patterns.
Mm.
And noticing is the first step to get curious, going, I wonder, is there a different way?
Yeah.
For me, I don't really use hashtags very much, but one that I do use a lot is hashtag slow learners rock. I'm a slow learner. I
Yeah.
need to remind myself a lot to slow down and notice not just what's happening in the world, because actually I'm doing that probably all the time, but just notice how I'm being in the world, because this is my life. This is
Mm.
it. Don't miss it. I've been too much in a hurry, too busy, too productive,
Yeah.
too, God, you're great, you get so much done.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm being
But
compelled by the mind that's just trying to, like, that's really reading off a script that, like, to an empty theater now at this point, or else you've left, like, it's reading off a script that uh, can be updated. We can make amends, or, to that script.
Completely,
Yeah.
completely.
Or throw
So,
it out.
or throw it out.
Mm,
And in some ways, when we notice what we're doing, then we realize, actually, this is our life. We
mm,
get to create the script line by line, moment by moment, day by day. And that's
mm,
hugely freeing uh, and certainly helps me remember that, life's too important to be just running off an old script, an old story.
mm. Yeah. 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 Well, one of the things that, and maybe it's going back to my cottage in the woods, is that, creating space for your evolving self, or your emerging self, or whatever, like holding space for it. And yeah, physically speaking, it could be something like, going away. Like, some of the another big breakthrough I had was on retreat, because, again, I was outside of, normal space and time, and there was space. So I think space is a really, really important um factor as well in holding space for what wants to evolve or emerge. And how we might do that is, as you say, waking up in the morning and holding some space in the morning to notice and be like, oh, isn't that interesting? Look how my mind is going at this and at that. But if you can imagine, almost like, um, you know, like physically within yourself, having like a almost like an arm of protection around. Do you know what? I heard a really good analogy by Rob Bell. Do you know how we carry a birthday cake with lit candles across a room, where we shield the candles from the direction it's going in to keep them from blowing out? It's kind of like that, where we are shielding that which is, you know, the candle, the light, we're shielding that. So how might we do that in a day is finding space somehow every day, whether that is going for the walk, listening to music, finding time to be on your own, take more baths, develop some kind of a ritual that is just you in that space with yourself. Um, but then the other thing, Ashleigh, as well, is like the input of others. I remember one time, not one time, I had a friend, and you might be like, I'd say to her, um, all will be, this is in my, of my first marriage, my old life. I was saying, I might have told her that me and himself were fighting. And then the next time I see her, all was hunky dory. But she would remind me, she'd be like, but I thought you were fighting. She would remind me of, what like, and so the thing she was almost saying to me was, well, you're not allowed to. Like, if you've fallen out, you have to stay fallen out. You can't come back in again. Or I thought yous were friends. This whole like thing. So people can encroach upon your process by saying, but I thought you were. Or that's not like you, or something like that. And one of the things that I would say, how do we hold space around that? How do we have boundaries around people wanting to come in and point out the discrepancy? And one of the ways that I learned to do that is to say, am I? Do I? No? So someone is like, oh, God, that's not like you. And instead of defending ourselves, because that's us falling back in like a defense, well, I just, because blah, 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 blah. Let their words just hang. So someone comes along and says, God, that's not like you to be up early in the morning. Instead of giving them a big story, you just go, no, that's it. Is it not? And silence, literally holding silent space, like let the person, and if they want to continue going on, you know, just let them rattle on, and you'd be like, it's interesting. And then move on. Like, in other words, just hold space for the shifts without feeling like you have to defend them. And that silence is really uncomfortable. Like, the not explaining yourself, not justifying, is really uncomfortable. But the words that I use in those moments when somebody challenges me around something that I don't feel strong about, that's what I revert to. I go, really? Is it not? No? So what you're doing there is basically you're putting the mirror back up and then they will end up explaining themselves. No, well, I just thought because blah, 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 blah. Oh, all right. That explaining ourselves is so exhausting. Ashling,
Yes.
Ashleigh, I should say, Ashling, Ashleigh. I am going to put all of your links, obviously, in the show notes. I'll put them to your website, your TED Talk, and your socials and things like that. Any last words that you'd like to leave our listener with?
Life is short, and possibly this might sound a bit heavy. I have a big fascination with the Stoics, and they tended to be very pragmatic sort of philosophers. And maybe it's because I was a nurse. And so I was with lots and lots of people when they were leaving this world. There's a place where none of us are getting out of here alive. And it is so easy for us to postpone and say, well, yeah, well, when the schools go back now, when the summer holidays are over, when I get this project over the line, when I reach my ex birthday, when I'm finished the divorce, when I'm over this, house refurb, whatever, we will often kick to touch, I suppose, uh, rather than address how is it that I want to live the rest of my life? It's such an important question. It's not a navel gazing question. Actually, it's saying, hold on, this is the life that I'm living. In 5 years' times, this summer will be the good old days. Do you remember that summer in 2025? Do you remember that summer? It was great. We had great weather for a few weeks. That's happening now. So I suppose my words are, don't get caught in the trance that is someday. Someday I'll be able to, I must when. None of us know what's ahead of us. And whether we have 20 or 40 years ahead, the sooner we begin to wake up to the fact that this is the life we're living and we might as well be writing the story that we're living into, the easier and more profound and simpler and more beautiful that being alive is. That's literally what it is. So if you hear yourself putting it off till when the kids go back to school, when the blah, 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 maybe just get curious and wonder if there's even one line of the story you could change today. Oh, sure, I'm always up late. I never go to bed early. Maybe you could change that one line and just go to bed earlier tonight. And you've started to change the story of your life. That's it. It's as simple and sometimes tricky as that.
Yes. Notice all the ways in which you are wrong and inconsistent and embrace them.
Completely.
Embrace them as like they are little breaks for the border.
Completely.
Brilliant. Oh, Ashleigh, this has been such a wonderful chat. Personally speaking, I'm so excited to bring it to my listeners. And but I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you. I feel like this was a conversation that I needed personally too.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you having the chat with me and inviting me to come on. And humans need other humans, and connection makes everything a little easier. So thank you so much for having me and for chatting with me and connecting with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Ashleigh.